till our people are free. We ain't gonna stop. There's usually some claps.
It's a lot of words.
One more time. I can hear my brothers crying. I can't breathe. I can hear my brothers crying. I can't breathe. Now we're in the struggle singing. I can't breathe. Now we're in the struggle singing. I can't breathe. We're calling out the violence of these racist police. We're calling out the violence of these racist police. And we ain't gonna stop till our people are free. We ain't gonna stop till our people are free. Cool, thank you. We should learn this because we're going to need to be in the streets again. All right, we're going to get started now. Thank you all for coming. My name is Yulsan Lim. I'm a co-director of the Justice Committee, which is a grassroots organization that works with families who've lost loved ones to police. We are a steering committee member of Communities United for Police Reform, of which many of these organizations represented here are part of, and we are here today for a number of reasons. The first reason is that 4.5 years ago, Eric Garner was murdered when NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo put him in a chokehold, and multiple other officers tackled him to the ground, compressed his chest, or stood by and did nothing to intervene in the violence.
That ain't right.
We're here today because 4 years ago to this day, 4 years ago on this day, the Staten Island District Attorney failed to get an indictment of Pantaleo.
That's right.
And we're here because after 4.5 years, Pantaleo and Sergeant Kizzy Odonis are the only two officers of the many, many officers involved in this murder and the cover-up that followed, that had disciplinary charges pending against them. And none of these officers have been held accountable in any way. Over the last 4.5 years, we've seen nothing but delay, obstruction, and shielding of abusive police officers by the NYPD and the de Blasio administration. 2 days from now, on Thursday, there is finally going to be a court date. And it's a date, a court date. It is not the beginning of a trial. A court date for the Civilian Complaint Review Board case against Pantaleo. And let's be really clear, it is not the NYPD that is prosecuting Pantaleo. It is the CCRB. And let us also be clear that the only acceptable outcome of this disciplinary process against Pantaleo is that he be fired from the NYPD.
That's right.
In contrast to the CCRB moving forward, the NYPD case against Kizzy Odonis, as far as we know, has not gone anywhere. And Gwen Carr, Eric Garner's mother, doesn't even know all of the names of the officers involved in her son's murder and the cover-up and related misconduct. Let me see those signs. We know Pantaleo and Odonis were there. Pantaleo put Eric in a chokehold and murdered him. Kizzy Odonis was the supervising officer on the scene who did nothing to intervene.
Here's your problem.
We know, thank you. We know that officers D'Amico, Ramos, and Fulani took part in holding Eric down or stood by and did not intervene. And we know that Sergeant Saminath lied on an official report to try and cover up. But we don't know the names of the other officers. 4.5 years later, de Blasio has not even given this mother that much respect to let her know who her son's murderers are. So, most of all, we are here today to stand with Eric's mother, Gwen Carr, and support her and uplift her demands for all the names and that all of these officers be charged and fired from the NYPD.
At least apologize. That was ridiculous.
And I'm gonna, without further ado, introduce Miss Gwen Carr. She is a social justice leader and she is the mother of Eric Garner.
Thank everyone for being here.
I thank all the supporters, my families, and everyone, because we do need your help. We need your support to back us on this. Because as Yusan said, 4.5 years ago, my son was murdered on video for the whole world to see. And no one has stood accountable yet. The CCRB is taking up the case. It's not the NYPD, because if you remember, on this date, there was no indictment.
That's right.
Insult to injury, no indictment. Nobody's seen any just cause to indict those officers, especially Pantaleo, because he was the one who put my son in an illegal chokehold, a chokehold that has been banned for 20 years.
That's right.
But instead, he is going home every year with a 6-figure salary and padding his pension.
That's right.
So we're not going to stand for this. We are out here because we are calling for justice.
That's right.
We are outraged, and we are not going to take this anymore.
That's right.
And it's not only for me, it's for other New Yorkers, it's for people around the nation.
That's right.
We demand justice.
That's right.
And we haven't gotten that yet. They want to prosecute only 2 of the officers, Officer Pantaleo and Sergeant Adonis, but we need all of the officers
That's right.
who stood and let my son be killed that day to stand accountable.
That's right.
There was in all at least a dozen officers. Some of them pounced on my son. Some of them looked the other way while he was being murdered. Others lied on reports, and we need all of them to stand accountable.
That's right.
So we need the de Blasio administration to step up and take action.
That's right.
They said that they were waiting for the DOJ. They didn't have to wait for the
That's
DOJ.
right. That's right.
They could have been fired 4 years ago. And this is what we're asking for today. And I thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Carr. And we're gonna next hear from Council Members Donovan Richard and Council Member Brad Lander. A few words, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gwen, for your courage, to your family. We are forever indebted to you and want you to know that we are with you to the end of this thing until we get the justice that we deserve. And let's be reminded the day that Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe" 11 times before he took his last breath will forever be a stain on the NYPD and this entire city. A stain that can only be cleaned by justice. And this thing has gone on for far too long. Those who were responsible for his death need to be held accountable, but those who also were complicit in standing by idly while this incident happened need to be held accountable to the highest standard. The NYPD has stalled for far too long on these discipline trials, allowing the pain of this family to linger for far too long. Once again, Officer Pantaleo needs to be held accountable, and as the chair of the Public Safety Committee, I'm also adding to this and saying that every officer at the scene needs to be held accountable as well. The feet dragging and stalled tactics, because that's what they were, that have lingered for this long are not going to work, because we are going to be here day in and day out to ensure that we see this thing through. Now, the CCRB has this case, and we are looking for swift justice. We don't want this dragging on for far too long. Listen, if we couldn't find them guilty, the very least we can do is ensure that they are held accountable, and just as Eric lost his life, they should lose their jobs, and they should be held to justice. So thank you, Gwen, once again, to the coalition, to everyone who's here, who's been a part of this coalition fighting day in and day out. We want you to know that you can be reassured that we'll be here every step of the way to see this through. Thank you.
Gwen, thank you for your courage and your leadership over all this time. I don't know how you do it, and my hat is off to you. Sorry. I think, what is not lost on me is that if my son were choked to death by an officer, I don't think we would be standing here 4 years later with zero accountability. It really is that simple. And here we are. And we are so tired of the lack of accountability in those cases where folks who are unarmed, who are not presenting a risk, are killed. And then here we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's no reason it's not going to be more years later asking for some basic justice. Really is that simple. Officer Pantaleo has to be fired. All the officers who are responsible have to be disciplined. And every officer who was there, that information has to be provided to Gwen and to all of us. It is an appalling lack of accountability, and we are just so deeply tired of it. Justice delayed is
Justice denied.
Justice delayed is
Justice denied.
Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you.
Thank you so much, council members. I'm going to next introduce Minister Kirsten Foy. He's the Executive Director of Arc of Justice. And Kirsten, like many of the organizations represented here, the Justice Committee CPR have been standing with Gwen since the very beginning.
Do all the love, gotta do the love. No justice, no justice, no justice. What do we want? Justice. What do we want? Justice. What do we want? Justice. What haven't we gotten? Justice. What hasn't Eric gotten? Justice. What hasn't Gwen gotten? Justice. What hasn't the city of New York gotten? Justice. What haven't the voters gotten? Justice. We're here today to repeat what we've been saying for 4 years. That the murder of Eric Garner in front of the world was an act of inhumanity beyond proportions and measure, and it happened on the watch of a mayor who was elected on the promise to make sure that that nonsense does not happen. That's right. This is a stain not only on the city, not only on the state. This is a stain, Mr. Mayor, to speak in your terms, on your legacy and your reputation as an executive of the city of New York. You will go down in history with Rudy Giuliani for his inaction on justice. You will go down in history with other executives who have failed to live up to the promise of ensuring that justice is equally applied across communities. We're here today because it's too little, too late. One officer who should have been fired years ago has been promoted, has been padded with his pension, has been given increases in salary and increases in overtime, and we're supposed to be satisfied with you just considering firing him. Well, we're not satisfied, and we're not going away, and Pantaleo is the first head that needs the roll, but he is certainly not the only one. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
Thank you. Before I call our next several speakers, I just want to give a shout out to Joshua Lopez. He is the nephew of John Collado, who was also killed by the NYPD. John was killed in 2011. Joshua is here standing with Gwen, just as many of the other families in New York have been standing with Gwen from the very beginning, and Joshua will be there standing with Gwen on Thursday. I want to ask to come up next, Councilmember Rory Lanceman, Assemblymember Michael Blake, Assemblymember Dan Quart, and Senator Julia Salazar.
Thank you. I want to correct something that was said earlier. It was said that the Staten Island District Attorney failed to secure an indictment. Let's be clear. The Staten Island District Attorney refuse to seek an indictment. Because we all know that district attorneys can get the indictments that they seek. But you have to be willing to pursue justice, no matter how uncomfortable it might make you. Likewise, the police department knows how to act and hold officers accountable when it wants to. Waiting 4 years to even begin a disciplinary trial in a case where we saw the evidence with our own eyes, the whole world saw that Eric Garner was killed on the streets of Staten Island by an illegal chokehold, tells us that the NYPD, this police commissioner, Commissioner Bratton, they don't want to hold Officer Pantaleo accountable. But we are here today with Gwen, as elected officials, with activists, to say that we demand accountability. We demand that the police department hold Officer Pantaleo and all of the officers involved in killing Eric Garner accountable. One last thing. The federal government sure knows how to act. The Justice Department sure knows how to act when it wants to separate families at the border. That's right. Or kick people out of this country who've led law-abiding lives for decades. We want the federal government to act right now and to indict Pantaleo under the federal civil rights laws and hold him accountable for the grotesque civil rights violation he committed on Staten Island that day.
Everybody take a deep breath. Every time you complain about the cold, every time you complain about things going on, remember you can do something that Eric can't do right now. When we talk about accountability, let's be very clear. Pantaleo and every officer that was standing there needs to be fired. Plain and simple. If any of us would have done what they did on that day, we would have lost our job. We would have lost our pension. We would have lost everything. Plain and simple. It is racist. It is discriminatory in every possible way. We should be focusing on helping our children with their school desks rather than Pantaleo being able to work behind a desk. We need to stand with Gwen Carr, and that's why we stand here today, to say enough is enough. It is unacceptable. And as someone who has experienced police brutality myself several times, I repeatedly tell people, my name and my title should not lead to getting a level of justice someone else can't get. Eric did not get justice on that day. Every single person did not get justice on that day. And that's why we stand here right now. So we find this unacceptable. We took action in the state to say we got to make sure we have transparency when it comes to these grand jury trials. And one of the reasons we're glad that Dan Donovan lost that race is because of the absurdity of what happened in that manner. But now we come here to say to Gwen, we have her back. And we have the back of every mother who doesn't have the camera to be able to stand with them. We're with every family that has needed justice and hasn't gotten it on today. Justice has been denied for too long. And we won't stop until Pantaleo and every officer that was there that day has their job taken away. Accountability must happen now.
Thank you to Gwen. Thank you for your courage to be here. Every 6 months it seems like we're here, whether fighting to repeal 50A or so many things that we do together for your courage to fight for justice. 4 years and no justice. No justice in a grand jury courtroom in Staten Island, where a district attorney purposely overpled to ensure there were no indictment. 4 years, no justice in Washington. Department of Justice sat on its hands, did nothing, still does nothing. And 4 years, no justice with the NYPD and its opaque, absurd internal disciplinary process in which we know nothing. There is a CCRB hearing, and that might be a good start, but it's important to note, nothing the CCRB says, does, or finds is binding either on the NYPD or any court of law. Right. It is a start. Testimony will be taken, but is not a roadmap towards actual justice. The only actual justice is what my colleague Michael Blake said. Pantalone has to be terminated, fired. He can't be on the force. And any officer who was with him, who observed and saw and did nothing, they have to go as well. That's the only sense of justice we have here. That's the only way the city can start healing on this terrible issue.
Yeah, Julie. Sorry, I introduced you all at once.
I just want to thank Ms. Carr, Eric Garner's family, and the families of every New Yorker who has been brutalized by the police, who have the courage to continue to speak out about this and to fight for justice even more than 4 years later. What the officers involved did to Eric Garner exhibits many forms of systemic violence that continue to be perpetuated in our city. It's racist violence, it's violence against the poor and working class, it's violence against people for just trying to live their lives. And it's going to continue if we don't demand accountability. Accountability is nothing short of actually firing the officers involved. Mayor de Blasio and the police commissioner know this. It is not a mere tragedy. They can, as Councilmember Lanceman mentioned, they have the ability to act. It is in their power. It is only in their power. And that's why we need to continue to demand action from them and expect it. Thank you.
Our next two speakers are Councilmember Jumaane Williams and Assemblymember Epstein. I just want to also say a special appreciation to Councilmember Jumaane Williams because he has really been with Gwen from the very beginning, even when the cameras weren't there. I'd ask you both to come up. Thank you.
Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed.
Justice denied.
Justice delayed.
Justice denied.
Thank you for taking the opportunity for all of you to be out here, to stand with you, Gwen, to stand with the family, to recognize that our system is broken, to recognize that 4 years later, the message we're sending out to police officers all over the state, all over the city is, if you engage in this behavior, there aren't consequences. You can keep your job, you can keep your pension, you can continue to work, you can even get promotions. There's no disincentive. We need to send the message clear that police violence, that abuse of our citizens is not tolerated in a city like New York, not tolerated in a state like New York. We need to stand firm and stand with the family because the next Eric Garner, yes, there will be the next, unless we stand here and say this behavior has to stop. So we stand with the family, we stand with the advocates, we'll continue to come back and stand together until we can get justice. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to look down at my calendar because today it says it's December 4th, 2018, which would mean that this is an administration of de Blasio and O'Neill. But I'm here speaking as if it's 6-7 years ago under the administration of Mayor Bloomberg and Commissioner Kelly. I say that because my brother Kirsten left, but I remember on Labor Day not too long ago, he was thrown to the ground and we were both arrested in an act of over-policing. I thank God that we're still here, but we both used the political capital that we had at that time to endorse a man named Bill de Blasio, who was public advocate at that time and who railed against the very things we are standing here to speak about. And he will talk about the issues of stop, question, and frisk, which were important. But I always said at that point in time that stop, question, and frisk, even if we deal with it,
are not the primary issues, and that the two main things that have to be dealt with are accountability and transparency. And I am frustrated because all of us here who lent any political credibility we had to that man in the mayoral office has been squandered because none of the police officers who are responsible for killing her son on camera have been brought to justice. How dare you use the political capital we have? How dare you use the lives of black and brown people who have been killed with impunity, and then as public advocates say you would do something about it, and now you've done nothing. You've done nothing to hold these people accountable. All we asked is that you be better than Michael Bloomberg. All we ask is that you be better than Rudy Giuliani. And when it comes to accountability, you have not. When it comes to transparency, you have gone backwards. You owe us all an apology. But the one thing you can give us is justice. Just do it, damn it.
That's right. Thank you.
Hey, hey, ho, ho. Kill the cops have got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Kill the cops have got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Kill the cops have got to go. Hey, hey.
Thank you. I want to also acknowledge that Council Member Idanis Rodriguez is here. I also want to really highlight a couple of things. First of all, this court date on Thursday is not the beginning of a trial for Pantaleo. It is our hope that a trial date gets set. And this is going to be a process, and we are going to need to keep coming out. So every single one of the elected officials that are here today, we thank you for being here, but we expect you to continue to be here. Just like all of these organizations that are here have been with her from day one. I also want to point out again, it is the CCRB that is prosecuting Pantaleo. It is not the NYPD. The NYPD and the mayor have done nothing but obstruct, have done nothing to hold the many officers accountable. And I'm going to say the names of the ones we know one more time. And I'd ask you all to repeat it. Officer Daniel Pantaleo. Sergeant Kizzy O'Donis. Sergeant Officer D'Amico. Officer Ramos. Officer Fulani. Sergeant Saminath. We know these officers' names, but we don't know all the names. And that's why Gwen is here. She is demanding all the names, and she is demanding that they all be fired. Our last speakers are Minister Kevin McCall, or Reverend Kevin McCall from National Action Network, and Monifa Bandele from Malcolm X Grassroots Movement and Moms Rising.
It doesn't make no sense that 4 years we have to repeat the same thing over and over again. It's interesting that de Blasio, we heard last night, within a day decided to be able to get rid of this OEM commissioner. But can't even get right. We call him can't get right because he can't even get right by firing these officers. You went through Bill Bratton and now you got O'Neill and they still don't know what to do. It doesn't make no sense that we have to come and support this family as we've been doing time and time again. We are not going to be reinventing the wheel of saying the same thing over and over again. Just like Councilmember Jamani is saying, it's all he has to do is just do it. And just do it if he just take the time to understand the pain. What does it take? It took the pain of Eric Garner dying. What does it take, de Blasio? Does it take somebody else dying? You want to talk about Trump, but you're acting just like him. You're acting just like him in here in New York City. So if you want to do something, you want to say that you are progressive, then do something by letting these officers not off the hook and letting them be responsible, release their names. It don't make no sense that we don't know the names. Names. Thank you very much.
4 years ago, they thought we would go away. They thought we would march in the streets, that we would sing our songs,
and that eventually we would go away. Well, we're here to say that mothers don't go away. And Gwen Carr isn't going anywhere. And as long as she stands here and she shows up every single day for justice, we will be here with her. Earlier, Jumani talked about how Mayor Bill de Blasio was elected. It reminded me of what Malcolm X used to say, that we've been hoodwinked. We've been bamboozled. And even though we've been hoodwinked and bamboozled, we aren't going anywhere. When you take away, when you kill a man and a woman or a child, when you kill an individual, you don't just kill them, you destroy a whole family. I came to also channel the spirit of Eric Garner, who lost her father and then lost her life. This is the pain that we're feeling. The mothers won't go away. We demand justice, and we'll be here for as long as it takes.
So I'm just going to say a few thank yous, and then we'll take questions. Thank you, of course, to all of the elected officials that came. I think I saw Councilmember Reynoso also. But really, especially, thank you to the organizations, the advocates, the organizers that have been standing with Gwen and Eric's family from the very beginning. The ones represented here today are Arab American Association of New York, Community Development Project, Justice League NYC, Make the Road New York, Vocal New York, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, Moms Rising, Justice Committee, New York City Anti-Violence Project, National Action Network, Arc of Justice, and of course our coalition, Communities United for Police Reform. Thank you all. And Gwen and others can take questions if there are any.
Ms. Carr, when was your last contact with the Justice Department or someone on your behalf that contacted you? Can you describe the thrust of that contact?
My last contact was about a year and a half ago.
And who did you meet with and what did they say?
I met with, they said they were a new regime. They were a whole new Justice Department than what we originally met with. And they said that they're turning over every stone, every rock to make sure they get it right.
I'm sorry, this was in Brooklyn or Washington?